Simmons. I'm part of the Brainerd cohort, and I teach high school math up in Staples Motley. And my topic of conversation, my topic for my action research was inquiry-based learning in mathematics. Kind of answering this question: how does questioning and discussion affect student confidence and achievement? So I 6th year teaching high school math. I do sort of our upper level high school math, advanced algebra, and all our college in the schools math. And I definitely, after this is my 3rd year teaching calculus, have a greater appreciation for it than when I took it in college myself. And favorite number would probably be the number 5. And you know, there's a golden ratio. It exists in a lot of nature and a lot of ratios. So, questions about what? How many of you are high school teachers? Okay. Middle school? Any elementary, pre-K? Okay. Upper level, adult education. Okay. How many of you are math? Nice. Okay. So a little bit about myself, I guess. This is my family, my wife Ashley and our son Will, whom we adopted a little over a year ago, and our pup Tori there, who we adopted a little less than a year ago. So definitely enjoy doing a lot with our family, being outside. We have a fenced-in backyard, so most of the time when we get home, it's just sending them out to the backyard, and they can run around and do whatever while we're working in the house. And yeah, it's a big part of what I do is because of my family and wanting to support them. So what kind of led me to inquiry-based learning? I'll get to a little bit about what inquiry-based learning is. I've used it, but sort of what brought this upon is maybe some of these questions that some of you have heard before as well. I don't know if any of those sound familiar to you. When are we ever going to use this? And my usual response to that was, well, you know, we use it for critical thinking, for problem solving, or you know, it's working on some of those skills rather than, well, you're not going to use your quadratic formula when you get into the real world, but, you know, unless you're going to teach high school math. When will I need to know this for my job? I don't remember learning this. You expect me to remember that? Because that was one of the biggest struggles that I came across as I was working with these kids is retention of information, especially when it came to math. It was, you know, they're kind of trying to stuff it in for that week, 2 weeks, however long that unit's going to be, and then they were just quick to forget it. They didn't want to maintain that information for very long. So this is sort of inquiry-based learning was something I stumbled across over the summer, and something that really caught my attention in how it approaches sharing information with kids and how students interact with information. So inquiry-based learning, which is what we call an inductive teaching style, similarly to, there's different ones like problem-based learning, project-based learning, case-based learning, discovery learning, or just-in-time teaching. All those have just slight variations from one to the next. Curious, has anyone worked with any of those different types of teaching or learning styles? Okay. So yeah, for me it was kind of a fun process getting to know a little bit more about this, and realizing that there were some pieces of that I already tried to instill in how I teach and how I have students interact with new information. But you know, just in a nutshell, is you're sort of presenting this as a question. Usually it's a question. Sometimes there's a problem that needs to be solved, or just certain observations about a particular topic. And you really you allow the students to spend time investigating that information first. Before you even preface it with much of anything, it's allowing the students to process the question, to do their own investigations, to read up on that information. So we use Chromebooks quite a bit, and I, for a lot of these lessons to begin with, I actually had them just going on the Chromebooks, using the internet, and I kind of walk them through what it looks like to research and to find credible sources and information on the internet, because well, there's differences there. And so posing these questions, and we'll talk about some of the ways that I started those out, but giving them time to interact with that information, or trying to problem solve on their own before maybe giving them some of those tools that will help them further along in the process. So they kind of realize the need for it, and why do I need this formula? Because the process of just, here's your formulas, here's your examples, and now let's go through and practice 20 of them. Okay, you got it, let's move on to the next one. Here's formulas you need for that one, more problems. Because I mean, that's how I was taught, right? It was just drill and kill kind of thing. You just get enough practice with it, you understand how it works, and you use that formula for the next situation. And it worked for me. I mean, I was able to understand things that way, and you know, specifically for math, it was something that became a little easier for me. But I realized it was not working for a large majority of my students in particular, and so I'm like, how do I connect all these students with, you know, being engaged in mathematics? No, there's really three different stages of inquiry from the research that I was doing. Is there's a more structured form of inquiry where I've set up the question, I've maybe set up some supporting pieces and some specific things that I want them to research and look through. There's more of a guided approach where I maybe step back and allow them to decide where to go with it and what to investigate on their own. And then there's a really open end where they sort of come up with questions and they sort of initiate the problem solving on their own. For most of what I did, it was a very structured inquiry, because for a lot of them that was their first experience working with any kind of inquiry-based learning, which had its own effects, as I'll share with you later too. But I just really like this quote from some of the sources I had. Two of the most necessary skills high school students lack as they prepare for higher education or the workforce are problem solving and critical thinking. So that was out of the Global Achievement Gap, which was one of the sources it's one of the ones we read the second year here, and lots of valuable information for me. It was actually kind of interesting. First copy I got, skipped a section, then repeated 2 sections twice. And I was like, this was actually one that I was really into, and I was going through pretty much page by page. So I emailed the company, they gave me a new copy of it. Actual one's got all the pages in it, so that was kind of nice. I see that. I mean, what I want to give these kids is the ability to problem solve and to be able to take in information that comes at them, the stuff that they need to figure out for their jobs, their careers. And how do I work, especially with somebody else, to solve this problem and do it to the point where I feel comfortable that this is a well-finished product, that I've at least gone to its end point where I can't go any further with it. And another source that quoted to say, together problem solving and critical thinking represent the ability to ask good questions. And so for me, to problem solving critical thinking comes from an ability to be able to ask those questions. Are we, and it's not natural. For many of you that teach high school, or even some middle school too, is they're not willing to ask a whole lot of questions. What Tim shared with his last one, the 6th grade group all had their hands up, and as they get older, less and less hands are raised, and you only get those select 2 or 3 when you're just posing that question to a group like that. But one of the things I have noticed is that the more opportunities they have to start discussion with just one other person or a couple other people to begin with, the more comfortable they are sort of getting that ideas out there, doing some of that brainstorming, then maybe there's something more that they're willing to carry to the rest of the group. So I see too many kids that give up before they've given themselves a chance to really understand the information. Like I was saying, problem solving sometimes can be very difficult. You have to spend time on it, give it some effort, and it's, especially if it's something that doesn't come naturally, it's a difficult process. And many students aren't willing to take the time. I mean, if you recognize any of these, it's a few. I mean, you got FedEx, next day delivery, you've got instant music, one-touch downloads, you have your text, Snapchats, whatever, that you can instantly be gathering information and connecting with the social cultures, instant videos, TV, live streaming. Now you don't even have to wait for movies to come out of the theater. You can buy, it's like $20 or whatever, but you can buy that access to that film before it ever hits DVD stage or even on some of those other movie streaming sites. Instant payment, you just watch through something like that. You got your iWatch, just pay for it, and you're on your way. Amazon Go stores, which are starting to become more and more. You just swipe your phone on your way in, you take everything, you walk out. I mean, it is becoming a culture more and more of instantaneous. You want it, you got it now, next second. Right? So we got anything you want to know, okay, click it, hey Siri, this is what I want to, hey, okay, Cortana or Alexa or whoever you're talking to, you all these different methods of getting that instant feedback of, right, and a lot of times there's no filtering that information to say, is this credible sources, is this helpful information for me, but they're used to getting that feedback and that gratification for whatever it is they need instantly. So for them to sit there and struggle with the math problem for maybe even 5 minutes, 20 minutes is very difficult. I mean, they constantly, you get that quick give up attitude. And that's, I mean, it was a constant struggle of just go back to the information, read through, give it another chance. But, they wouldn't want to take the time to do that, and so I wanted to figure out a way to engage them more in that understanding, and how can we get them asking more questions and digging a little deeper and actually giving that full effort to try to understand. So some of the I kind of outlined here 3 basic students, I would say, that in the different things that you experience with each student. So you've got the student A who's not engaged, who's very frustrated by the whole process of trying to understand mathematics, hates math, doesn't put in much effort, and needs the major support. I've got a homeroom of maybe 15 kids, and all of them are in there because they need math support. The only difficult part is one of me, as soon as I walk away from them, they go, oh, I can't figure out the rest of this, so I can just go screw around or do whatever until he comes back to me, then they'll get some more effort. Well, I tried, I was in there, but you wouldn't help me, because there's little drive in a lot of that to actually go and work through the problems themselves or give an effort to look for the resources, because it takes time. And they don't get that instant feedback. They want to give up. Student B, which is kind of in the middle of the road, you got likes math, often engaged, but allows the mind to wander. Okay, doesn't understand the applications, right? How does this relate to me? So there's certain parts of it they kind of get and they understand and they connect with, but overall, and then the memorization part of it, the knowing the vocabulary, theorems, and all the different formulas that come along with math for them. And student C, who loves math, is always engaged, asks questions, and regardless of how well you structure your classroom, but they're always going to find a way to get something out of it. each one has its own challenges. Challenge one was to get student A involved in discussion, right? Just to make them a part of the process, to get them to buy into trying. Student B, keeping them engaged and pushing them further to seek more. I guess you could say that with student C also, is to deepen their understanding and to get them to that next level, not just to be content with, well, I figured out the answers to those ones, I'm good to go. But to be pushing the limits on what their understanding is and how they can relate it to other parts. Those are some of the things that I wanted to be able to accomplish with IBL is increasing student engagement, improving their attitudes towards mathematics, and long-term retention, like saying, of their content knowledge, and just creating a lifelong learner. Because to me, if they can take the skills and understand within the math classroom, that's great and that's fine. But if they can't go to that next step, or going into their college or career, and be able to learn for themselves or be able to problem solve for themselves, then it doesn't really matter if they did well in my math classroom. I mean, it's just one piece of their path to their future. And I think as educators, we'd all want that for our kids, is to take some of the things that we can give them in our classroom, be able to use them beyond that. So the way I initiated each of my units has with essential questions. So this past summer, just as I was getting into the heart of my research and finding all these different sources, our entire district went to this conference put on by NJPA, our local education solutions, for an education summit. And this guy, Jay McTeague, was speaking on these things called essential questions. And as I'm thinking about what kind of inquiry am I doing, I'm going, oh, okay, well that seems like it's interesting. It might connect a little bit with what I want to do. So yeah, after going to his session, I was like, I'm gonna make this a part of what I'm doing. This is gonna be a huge part of my inquiry-based learning. So the main ideas behind the essential questions that he wrote with, this was so Jay McTeague and Grant Wiggins, was to provoke further intellectual thought. Again, what do they take beyond just the information that's there in front of them? For things to be, these essential questions are open-ended. Most of the time they're not a yes or no, but there are even some situations where maybe it's a yes or no question, but it just begs to be pushed further to help explain that process. Engaging, requiring more evaluation, leading to those content-specific ideas, and sort of knowing, here's where I want this unit structure to go. What are some questions that are going to lead us to that? Requiring justification, and again, sparking more inquiry, more discussion. So I've got a little experiment that we're going to do here. Everybody has, or pretty much everyone probably has a smartphone on you right now, so take it out. So I'm gonna give you some questions, and I want you to do your best to kind of find information that answers that question. This is an art history question. What common artistic symbols were used by the Incas and Mayans? So just if you're trying to gather that information, what's some of the first ideas that you come up with? Walk by right now, they think I'm not paying
You put them all to sleep.
Too busy.
That's Jack. Got some of those pictures? Yeah. Yep. Right. So you can spawn off some answers, right? Use sky, person, mount, wits, keen, alam. I don't know the pronunciations of any of those, but you got some instant answers, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey Siri. Just kidding. I mean, if you put it in there, right? I mean, how do arts and shape and reflect culture? So it's still digging into that same topic, but yet you're not going to get that quick response of, well, here's some pictures and symbols, here's some different phrases that the Incans and Mayans have used. Here's your answer. Let's move on. Because they're going to want to figure out how to get it as quick as they can. And that's going to be what they come up with. And you get some of those responses written down. But now all of a sudden you throw that one out there. Granted, you'll probably get a lot of them that leave it blank for a while. But it takes some research. It takes some digging into, well, looking at a specific culture, looking at specific artistic design within some of those cultures. Okay, another one here.
I do.
Yeah.
Assassination of the Earth.
That's the answers, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so you may still have that retained in your mind.
But I'm not on my device. Should I see it?
Google does a great job of even just summarizing the most well-known answers or responses to say, oh yeah, assassination of Archduke Kingsland. So that answer is there, and many times for a lot of them, the thinking stops at that point. You got your answer, there you go. I think this sparks further questions.
And a longer answer too. I mean, you gotta, and probably different answer by every kid too.
Yeah.
It gets that discussion going, right? And even if it's just between two of them initially, to start to say, well, what do you think? Is it, and I mean, pretty much every question I ask in class now is you have an aisle partner, you're going to discuss with them. You have a seat partner behind you, discuss with them. Your group of four, discuss. Okay. I'm much more willing to talk to one other person. Sometimes you even got to poke and prod it down a little bit, but it gets that conversation stretched out over a longer period of time. You're focused on more than just your response to that specific question. Even though, I mean, there's great insight into, oh, that one event sparked this, and some of those kids that really enjoy that are going to dig in and they're going to go, what happened next? What was the response to that? Or what did these countries do? And I know for me, even wanting to know that information, just those that are seekers really want to figure that out. But that's not every student. We know that. So how do you engage that student A that's not there, that doesn't want that? So here's a more mathematical. classifications of numbers under the complex number system you go through, you're gonna find different ways to classify. You got some of these different images that maybe are a nice, succinct way to explain. Okay, well, that's how you classify them. I guess you got all the different ones right there. There you go. Done, Simmons. Asking those whys and the hows, and where do we go from there? This is actually what I started my first unit with, this question. Why do we classify? You get those different levels of responses, but then from there, where do we go with it? Getting them that chance to discuss, to engage, to provoke further thought. Classifying numbers. Why do we classify numbers? So we talk about what the classifications are, and that naturally kind of led into our classification number system. And then as they learn more about it, we go back to the question. Okay, now that we know a little bit more about the classifications, why do you think we classify numbers? And there's some of those, and that's their goal with these essential questions is some of those may never be fully answered by the time you leave, your entire class. So you may go 9 months and you still really don't, you're still seeking to answer that question. And those, they're diamonds in the rough per se, but again, with numbers in a sequence, we connect patterns, we can kind of see what's happening, and maybe with the help of the calculator, we can figure out what comes later on down the road. Let's say, what are the patterns in the information we collect and how are they useful? So, for me, the difficult part was, though, I put a couple of the history ones up there too, because I felt like those are some great examples. Math, seemed like a much more difficult process of finding those open-ended, especially driving questions that can kind of go different directions. Those of you who do teach math, it's sequential. There's pretty much right and wrong to any question you could ask, so it's hard to get those open-ended questions. And that right there was the biggest initial struggle for me, was how do I get to some of those questions that really dig into deeper part of mathematics. Then all of a sudden I was like, man, when I first got into math, it's like, this is great, there's always right and wrong answers, there's no way to misinterpret, I know when kids are right and wrong, and but now I'm kind of realizing there's some benefits to those kind of things too. So I appreciate those. So some of the other ones that we've used, this initial one here was one that I maintained throughout the class, and I still have it on the board now. And to get them to reference that, well, what do good problem solvers do? Because that's what I want to be. I want to be good problem solvers. Connecting it to their real life. They want to know when they're going to use this. They want to know how it applies to their real life. Sure, they don't necessarily have to dig into that data just to be able to use it in their lives, but just to understand, how does this connect for me? Where is this used? So for those that are interested in more of that in your essential questions, this book was pretty intuitive, provide a lot of good information, some different examples, and their website, essentialquestions.org, has even more, and links to other different things that are helpful if you're trying to implement more of that open-ended discussion. I think they also have a DVD. Yeah. So another way it kind of presented this initial inquiry process was I wanted to give them a sense of guidelines of what's our purpose in this, and what are we trying to do when we're asking these questions of ourselves at the beginning of the lessons. And there's just a few examples. I created this list of what I call the anticipation of inquiry. I started just calling it the expectations of inquiry, and I just felt like expectations just feels too much like, well, this is what's expected of you. I need you to do this. And although that's kind of what the goal is, I want it to be sort of a little bit different. So maybe anticipation is the best word for it, but and I pulled some of this sort of summarized from their book. Is every question doesn't have a single correct answer. You know, so I wanted them to kind of understand that even with math, even though there is a lot of times right or wrong answers, it's gave them some specific examples where there are multiple answers. And you see that once we got to a correct answer, a lot of them stopped and went, okay, well then that's it, let's move on. Oh, but what else? And asking that question, what else? And all of a sudden they're like, well, there is more. There are some other ways to do that. And I, over and over again, would tell them, I love wrong answers. Absolutely love wrong answers. Because there's somebody else that's going to come across that wrong answer, that wrong way of doing it. But then it helps us to understand more of why we do it this way. Why doesn't that work? Instead of just, this is how it works, that's all I know. The more we experience the incorrect ways of doing it, the more we understand as to why this one doesn't. Everyone's entitled to an opinion, but the best ones are supported by evidence and reasoning, which, again, takes time. So when they're willing to do that, it's beneficial. Takes practice and time, and it's normal to question or reconsider things you thought you understood previously. Because for some of them I have one student in particular who could probably teach himself all the way through calculus, and just kind of one of those brains that just soaks everything in and kind of looks ahead and starts looking at weird random math. He's asking me about Pascal's triangle as a binomial, and you know, I don't know where he gets these, but he's just interested in it already. So for when kids hear him share ideas or something, they just kind of always assume it's right, and they always kind of assume that, you know, that's the limitations of what Mr. Simmons is trying to figure out. But there have been situations where that's not the case. And so I love to point that out, and he's a good sport about it too, you know, he sometimes overthinks or misinterprets things, and so to be able to share those struggles of, right, we can't always just assume that this is the only way, and it's got to be the correct answer, because Jeff knows it. Well, all right, so some of the collections I did had to do with their journal writing. So I used journal writings sort of two different ways. I did them as part of their investigations. So posing that essential question, or maybe posing an initial word problem that had some open-ended questions to it, and allowing them to have time in class to investigate it, to research that. These were some of the ones I like to incorporate also. So I started one of my second unit, I think, with these two questions. Say, can you be in two places at one time? Can you be in one place at two different times? And so, well, that, you know, now that it doesn't necessarily connect directly to math, there are all sorts of responses and just discussion. Well, if you consider time travel, and well, if you think about, like, I'm here and here, those are two different places. So it works. And because in that point there was no one right answer, there was no that's the truth. So then we can move on from there. It was, well, if you think about it this way, and so hearing those different student perspectives. To think about, well, I didn't think about it that way. Yeah, you're right. And so you get all these kind of interesting ideas, and but what this purpose was is to sort of initiate the idea of a function. What does it mean for a function? If I plug in a specific value, can I only get one output, or is there multiple outputs possible? Or if I plug in two outputs and get two inputs and get the same output, what does that mean? So there's sort of this way of building into some of our units. So some of the data collection was through surveys, and I really, one of the surveys were probably where I gathered the most information, because you hear directly from the kids. So I took a survey on their attitude and on their confidence as it relates to mathematics. There was 40 statements, I guess, and then they had to either agree or disagree, neutral, or strongly agree or disagree. And then sort of breaking up the information from there to just, I had certain ones that I decided these were confidence-based questions, these ones were attitude-based questions, and to see where the growth was. And I did the same at the end of this study, to see what changed. How much did their confidence change? How much did their attitude change toward that? Then I also did some interviews and reflections, just to get their reaction to inquiry-based learning, what they liked about it, what they didn't like, what they felt like was the pros of that format, what were some cons, and also being able to compare it to previous math classes. One issue with how this was is they're coming to me, and the class was advanced algebra, and this was their first experience with me as a teacher. So they had somebody else as a previous math teacher, and so to compare that, a lot of times can be apples to oranges, but generally I was just trying to get their sort of feelings on math and focus specifically on that. So it's always hard to interpret those results to decide whether or not that's affected by specifically inquiry-based learning, or but using some of the other factors to sort of put those together. And then of course one of the collections was that through their assessments we took 6 assessments over this 13-week span, and used that to determine how it impacted their math knowledge and how it impacted their problem-solving abilities. So let's look at some of our results here. First, I'm looking at the assessments. Now, one big thing to note with this, I took over the past 4 years, and I tried to keep the assessment somewhat similar to prior years, making sure it was on the same content anyway. So 6 different assessments, could be quizzes or tests. So going back and looking at averages over the previous 4 years, including this year. This first one here is their 13-week average, and then the first 4 assessments versus the last 2. So to look not only at what was the year-to-year changes, but then also what was the difference between their first couple assessments versus to the next 4. So the biggest increase then was this year, which was encouraging, I guess. There was a 4.6% increase from their first 4 assessments to their final 2, which the next highest from 2013 was only 2.7%. So much larger increase there between those different assessments. And then of course our overall average, I think, was a couple, half a percentage higher than the next highest. So very encouraging. However, one thing to be noted about that is that in 2016, the year I did the study, was it took a 13-week span for that study, for those, I think, 4 units. But in 2015, 14, and 13, those same units took 9 weeks. So therein lies the kind of the downfall of one of the struggles I realized with this is it was time consuming. And I think a lot of that had to do with just this is probably their first exposure to an inquiry-based learning or inductive teaching model. They hadn't had that experience before, so something for them to get comfortable with. Spending a lot of time working through trying to question and research on their own or in small groups, instead of just me laying it out and them trying to chew on it or whatever, you know. So that was kind of the biggest eye-opening thing. It was very encouraging, obviously, for the increase in their scores, but the time-consuming nature was something to take into account, because you're still covering all the same content in a matter of 9 months. So to take those extra 3-4 weeks, you know, can be costly and can have its own effects. All right, some of the survey results about their attitude and confidence. So this was just the post-study results here on attitude. So I took these different questions that connected well with attitude, and kind of compared their scores there. And I'll get to what the change was from the pre-study, but the largest one by far, where over 80% agreed. So positive, I'll say positive responses, because some of the questions were worded kind of oppositely, where a positive response would be disagreeing versus some that if you agree, that would be a positive response. So positive responses was maybe strongly agree or agree. Sometimes they might be disagree or strongly disagree. But the first statement on there, which was that math is a very worthwhile, necessary subject. And we'll look at what the change was from beforehand, but by far over 80% feel that math is a very worthwhile, necessary subject. And across the board, most of those, other than a few there towards the end, that have a higher population that agreed versus disagreed, or felt positively about that versus negatively. So here's kind of the change. So I know not all of you are math people. I try to stay away from too much of the statistics, but it's kind of interesting. I feel like so that one that had the highest overall, the post-study, had this much of an increase in the positive responses. Most of that came from a difference in the neutral responses. But so some of those that were maybe neutral on that before, I don't really know if math is worthwhile. Maybe not for me, but then after the study, kind of feeling more like, yeah, I think math is worthwhile and necessary subject. So that's kind of what this, and most of the larger decreases there in the middle, these are neutral responses. The green is the positive response, so most of those were an increase, and then the blue is your negative responses. Most of those, that's kind of mixed with increase and decrease. So on average, the positive attitude responses went up 7%, and the negative attitude responses also went up, but only by 0.3%. So higher percentage that felt negatively, but pretty much stayed the same, and then quite an increase in the positive responses. And so that was a 23.5% increase there for question.
Just out of curiosity, what was question 25, since that seems to be the only one where the positive responses
decreased? Yeah. 25 mathematics is dull and boring. So it felt well, there was a decrease in the positive responses for that one, and an increase in the negative responses. And that will come into play with some of the student responses too, is because that took a longer process. There were some of the students that those students see then, who they understand the math, they get it, they pick it up quickly, and after that, as we're still going through the discussions on there, and just was too much time spent for them on one thing. That 13 weeks instead of the 9 weeks, and so I kind of feel like that's where some of that change happened. But yeah, I forgot to mention that at the beginning, but feel free to ask questions anywhere throughout. I don't have to do much, but I'll sometimes have questions at the end there too. So then this is more the confidence responses here. I know that we don't have the statements in front of us. I can definitely send you some of that information too, if there's any like, well, I'd be interested to see what that survey looked like, or what this survey looks like. It's all included in my paper there too, and I can definitely send that to you. Alright, so there's some of the changes, excuse me, for those in confidence levels. Again, green being a change in increase in positive responses. I think there were actually any that decreased positive responses. One of them that had absolutely no change at all. But, so, although there did seem to be an increase in their attitude and confidence, it's always hard to know what was the factor. So 15 out of the 19 positive responses to confidence base were increased. On average, positive responses went up 8%, negative confidence responses actually went down 1.5%. So there was a bigger differential in those ones. Right. Some of the other just questions that we got had to do with just specific things about that, whether the teacher was helpful, whether they learned well from group work. Very interesting one here. Now I realize I kind of do. It's a little backwards of the ones we were just doing, but the strongly agree and agree are the green ones on the lower part of it, and the disagree and strongly agree are in blue there. But this was kind of the most eye-opening one here. That 3/4 of them felt that they can't learn well from self-discovered learning. So, and hard to say necessarily why that is, but they did appreciate group work, and they just felt like, again, it goes back to my homeroom with 15 kids in there, but as soon as you leave them alone, it's shut down. I'm done here. I can't figure any of this out on my own. I need that extra person. I need that master teacher to come and explain this to me until I can understand it. Just well enough to get to that next level. And student responses, classroom structure. So this is comparison to previous math classes they had as to whether it was less effective, more effective, or just as effective with classroom structure, and specifically kind of explain that this was in relation to the inquiry-based learning process, where 46% more effective and 39% just as effective, 15% less effective. The balance of communication, and that was another part of what I felt like with that lecture-based teaching was, I feel like that's just way too much talking for me, as I'm sitting up here talking to you for a long time, but I didn't like functioning that way, and the kids don't appreciate functioning that way day to day. So by asking this question, I kind of wanted to gauge how that communication, how they felt about that, but most felt it was balanced. Some felt more that there's too much student talk, if anything, versus the teacher. We're just going to see that smaller percentage there. And for this one, this was part of an anonymous survey too. So I did, for these type of questions, I wanted to make sure that was something that wasn't affected by the fact that their name was connected to it, or I felt like, no, it was good, it was really good. So they were anonymous responses to these ones. So also some of the student responses that we had were kind of interesting. I'll just let you read them.
I think the last one, you don't explain enough. That goes a lot to that mentality of they don't want to figure it out for themselves, which I think is very true. Like global achievement gap said.
Yeah.
Well, and like on this, almost 75% disagree at some level that they can learn well, and I wonder if it's disagree that they can learn well, or just don't like it because it's harder.
Yeah.
And it takes more energy.
Yeah. The last one, yep.
Honest feedback, it feels like.
Yeah, well, and that's why I wanted it anonymous. I wanted their outright feelings with that. So yeah, maybe those more intrapersonal people that don't like everybody talking, just want to focus on that. But then also some of the positive feedback was really encouraging.
See, they don't talk after sixth grade.
Yeah. And I do want to say here that the spelling was their original spelling, so it's, I do have spell check, they just chose to ignore it. But yeah, that was interesting experience. It's more positive. That's kind of a key one here, I felt like. Remembering what they learned instead of needing to look back, because they had the time to investigate it and dig into it versus just here it is, work through it, move on to the next thing. So kind of already talked about how that affected results, but just in real short here is that this was very encouraging, other than the fact that that time took a lot longer than in previous years. So I do plan to continue using inquiry-based learning as part of my teaching, just, you know, still work in progress, figuring out how that works in a way that isn't as time consuming, or to maybe take different pieces to choose to investigate on their own. But definitely I felt like for me a very worthwhile subject and something that I enjoyed doing research on and will continue to use. Any questions about the process itself? Or? Yeah.
Did you have students with the 4 weeks added get bored with that? Because you have your students obviously, and the ones who are excel in math, they like to be to themselves and just give it to me and I'm gonna go, and keep moving. But 4 more weeks, you know, did you lose those students?
I won't know that I necessarily lost them, but yeah, those were some of those responses that are like the dull and boring there maybe wasn't as good of an increase with that as I was hoping, but yeah, so I think there's definitely those streamlined students that did kind of get done with that information. They dug into it as deep as they felt like was, you know, necessary for them.